The contractions started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in June, and by 4 a.m., I knew this wasn't another false alarm. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts list. Mom, Dad, Jake, Emma. But even as my finger hovered over their names, I already knew where they were. 300 miles away in Boston, celebrating my sister Chloe's MBA graduation from Harvard Business School. The graduation I was supposed to attend too, until my doctor put me on bed rest 2 weeks ago. I was completely, utterly alone. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it really means to show up for the people you love. This is the story of how I gave birth to my daughter with only a night shift nurse and a janitor by my side, while the people who were supposed to love me most were toasting champagne and taking photos without me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Molly Richardson, and 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect family. We were the Richardsons of Millbrook, Connecticut, the kind of family that neighbors envied and friends constantly praised. Dad owned the most successful accounting firm in town. Mom volunteered at the hospital auxiliary. My older sister Chloe was the golden child, getting her MBA from Harvard, and my twin brother Jake was finishing his residency at Johns Hopkins. Then there was me, the youngest at 24, working as a graphic designer at a small marketing agency, and married to my high school sweetheart, David. We were supposed to be the success story, the American dream family. Sunday dinners at Mom and Dad's colonial house on Maple Street, annual Christmas cards with all of us in matching sweaters, family vacations to Martha's Vineyard every summer. From the outside, we looked like we had it all figured out. But families are complicated things, and sometimes the cracks don't show until the foundation starts to shift. The first crack appeared when I announced I was pregnant at Jake's engagement party last October. I was 12 weeks along, finally ready to share the news after keeping it secret through the scary first trimester. David and I had been trying for 2 years, and we were over the moon. I imagined squeals of delight, hugs, immediate planning for baby showers and nursery decorations. Instead, Mom's face fell. "Oh, Molly," she said, and there was something in her tone that made my stomach drop. "This is Jake's night. Couldn't this have waited?" Dad cleared his throat awkwardly. "Congratulations, sweetheart," he said, but his eyes kept darting to Jake and his fiancée Sarah as if he was worried about stealing their thunder. Chloe, who had flown in from Boston for the party, didn't even look up from her phone. "Cool," she mumbled. "Just make sure the baby doesn't come during graduation season. I've got Harvard's ceremony in June, and Mom's already booked our hotel." Jake, blessed him, was the only one who seemed genuinely excited. He wrapped me in a huge bear hug and whispered, "I'm going to be the best uncle ever." But even his enthusiasm couldn't fill the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. That night, driving home to our little apartment downtown, David tried to reassure me. "They're just surprised," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Give them time to adjust." But time didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Over the next few months, every family gathering became a delicate balancing act. Mom would ask about the baby, almost as an afterthought, usually right before launching into detailed updates about Chloe's thesis or Jake's hospital rotations. Dad would pat my growing belly awkwardly when he remembered, but most of our conversations centered around his business or local politics. Chloe barely acknowledged my pregnancy at all. During her Christmas visit, she spent most of the time on conference calls with study groups or buried in her laptop working on case studies. When I showed her ultrasound photos, she glanced at them for exactly 3 seconds before asking if she's seen her phone charger. "She's just focused on the school," Mom would say whenever I mentioned feeling hurt. "You know how important this MBA is for her career. She's worked so hard to get into Harvard." Jake tried to bridge the gap when he could, sending me articles about baby development and calling every few weeks to check in.
But he was swamped with his residency, working 80-hour weeks and studying for board exams. I understood. I really did. But it didn't make the loneliness any easier. The second major crack appeared in March when I was 6 months pregnant and starting to show significantly. We were at Sunday dinner, and I was telling everyone about the nursery David and I had started setting up. I pulled out paint swatches, excited to get their opinions on whether to go with gentle sunrise or soft moonbeam for the walls. Either one sounds nice, honey, Mom said distractedly, not even looking at the samples. She was focused on her laptop, scrolling through hotel options in Boston. Chloe, look at this suite I found near Harvard Square. It has a separate sitting area where we could host a little celebration after your graduation. Chloe looked up from her own laptop, where she was working on yet another assignment. Perfect, Mom. Just make sure you book the restaurant reservations soon, too. Jake said Sarah's parents want to join us for dinner after the ceremony. I sat there, holding my paint swatches, feeling invisible. What do you think, Dad? I tried one more time. Dad glanced over briefly. Whatever makes you happy, Molly. Your mother has better taste in these things than I do. Then he turned to Jake. Son, have you given any more thought to that fellowship opportunity in San Francisco? It could really set you up for a fantastic career. I folded my paint swatches and put them back in my purse. David reached under the table and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. He was always good at reading my moods, knowing when I needed comfort without me having to ask for it. After dinner, as we helped clear the dishes, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Molly, I hope you understand how important Chloe's graduation is to our family, she said, her voice taking on that tone she used when she was trying to be diplomatic. Harvard Business School. It's such an incredible achievement. We want everything to be perfect for her special day. Of course, Mom, I said, loading plates into the dishwasher. I'm proud of her, too.
Good, Mom smiled, looking relieved. I knew you'd understand. And don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to focus on baby preparations when we get back from Boston. But even as I nodded and smiled, something cold settled in my stomach. The baby was due June 15th. Chloe's graduation was June 12th. I'd mentioned this timing concern to Mom twice before, but she always brushed it off. First babies are always late, she'd say, with a wave of her hand. You'll probably go 2 weeks over. Besides, the doctors can induce you after we get back if needed. The third crack, the one that should have warned me what was coming, happened in early May. I was 8 months pregnant, uncomfortable and exhausted, when Dr. Martinez delivered news that changed everything. Your blood pressure is elevated, and there's protein in your urine, she explained during my routine checkup. I'm concerned about preeclampsia. I want you on strict bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. Bed rest. No work, no driving, no traveling. David would have to take time off to take care of me, and there was absolutely no way I could make the trip to Boston for Chloe's graduation. When I called Mom to break the news, her disappointment was palpable, even through the phone. Oh no, she said, and I could hear her thinking, calculating, trying to find a solution that would let me attend anyway. Are you sure the doctor said no traveling? Maybe if we got you a wheelchair, or if Dad drove really slowly? Mom, the doctor was very clear. Bed rest means bed rest. I can't even go to work, let alone sit in a car for 6 hours. There was a long pause. Well, she said finally, I suppose we'll just have to take lots of pictures for you. You're still going? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Molly, sweetheart, we can't miss Chloe's graduation. She's worked so hard for this, and Harvard only has one graduation ceremony. We've already paid for the hotel, the flights for Jake and Sarah. It would be impossible to change everything now. But what if the baby comes early? Another pause, shorter this time. First babies are almost always late, honey, and David will be there with you. You'll be fine. That night, David held me while I cried angry, frustrated tears into his shoulder. Maybe I'm being unreasonable, I sobbed. Maybe I'm just hormonal and overreacting. You're not overreacting, David said firmly, stroking my hair.
It's natural to want your family there when you give birth. Anyone would feel hurt by this. But Chloe's graduation really is important, I said, trying to be fair, even though my heart was breaking. She's worked so hard, and it is Harvard. And you're having their first grandchild. That seems pretty important, too. Over the next few weeks, as I lay in bed watching Netflix and working on freelance design projects from my laptop, I tried to make peace with the situation. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe first babies are always late. Maybe I was being selfish, expecting my family to revolve around my pregnancy when Chloe had achieved something so impressive. Jake called a few times to check on me, clearly torn about the whole situation. I could stay, he offered during one conversation. Sarah would understand. No, I told him, because I meant it. You should be there for Chloe. It's her big day. Even Chloe called, which surprised me. It was the longest conversation we'd had in months. I'm sorry you can't come, she said, and she actually sounded like she meant it. I know this whole thing is complicated. I'm proud of you, I told her. Harvard Business School. That's incredible, Chloe. You deserve to have everyone there celebrating you. Thanks, Moll. It had been years since she'd used my childhood nickname. I'll miss having you there. For a moment, it felt like we were sisters again, instead of strangers sharing the same parents. The morning of June 11th, the day before Chloe's graduation, my family loaded up Dad's SUV with luggage and drove away from Millbrook. Mom had stopped by the night before with a care package, magazines, snacks, and a promise to call as soon as the ceremony was over. Take lots of pictures, I called from the bedroom window as they pulled out of the driveway. David took the day off work to stay with me, just in case. We spent it watching movies, playing card games, and talking about names for the baby. It was actually nice, peaceful in a way that felt like the calm before a storm. See, I told David as we settled in for the night, everything's fine. Baby's staying put, just like Mom said. But babies, as it turns out, don't always follow the schedule you've planned for them. At 3:47 a.m. on June 12th, exactly 12 hours before Chloe was scheduled to walk across that Harvard stage, I woke up to a pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The pain came in waves, starting deep in my back and radiating around to my belly like someone was wrapping a steel band around my torso and slowly tightening it. I gripped the bed sheets, trying to breathe through it the way we'd learned in those birthing classes David and I had attended every Tuesday evening for the past 2 months. David, I whispered, but he was sleeping deeply beside me, exhausted from staying up late to finish a project so he could take time off when the baby came. I shook his shoulder gently. David, wake up. He stirred, but didn't fully wake. The contraction passed, leaving me sweaty and shaking. I looked at the clock. 3:52 a.m. Maybe it was just Braxton Hicks contractions. False labor. Dr. Martinez had warned me about those. But then another wave hit, stronger this time, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was the real thing. My water broke 5 minutes later, soaking through the sheets and onto the mattress. David, I said more urgently, grabbing his arm. The baby's coming! This time, he jolted awake, immediately alert in that way new fathers-to-be learn to be. What, now? Are you sure? My water just broke, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though panic was rising in my throat. We need to call Dr. Martinez and get to the hospital. David was already out of bed, pulling on clothes and grabbing our hospital bag, the one we'd packed 3 weeks ago, just in case. How far apart are the contractions? I was timing them on my phone between waves of pain. About 5 minutes apart, lasting 45 seconds. Even through the fear, I was proud that I remembered the guidelines we'd learned. While David called Dr. Martinez's answering service, I managed to get dressed, stopping twice to breathe through contractions that were getting noticeably stronger.
By the time we were in the car heading to Millbrook General Hospital, they were 4 minutes apart and lasting over a minute each. "Should we call your family?" David asked as he navigated the empty pre-dawn streets. I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds before another contraction hit. When it passed, I shook my head. What's the point? They're 300 miles away. They can't do anything from Boston except worry. But even as I said it, part of me desperately wanted my mom. I wanted her to tell me everything would be okay, to hold my hand, to share the experience of meeting her first grandchild. I wanted Dad's terrible jokes to distract me from the pain, and Jake's medical knowledge to reassure me that everything was progressing normally. Most of all, I wanted to not be doing this on the same day that was supposed to be all about Chloe. The emergency entrance at Millbrook General was quiet, with just a security guard and a tired-looking receptionist behind the desk. David helped me into a wheelchair while I filled out paperwork between contractions, which were now 3 minutes apart and lasting over a minute each. "First baby?" asked the nurse who wheeled me up to the maternity ward. Her name tag read Sandra, and she had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Yes," I managed between gritted teeth. "It's too early. I'm not due until the 15th. Babies come when they're ready, honey. 3 days early isn't really early at all. This little one just wants to meet you." They got me into a delivery room and hooked up to monitors that showed what I already knew. I was definitely in active labor. Dr. Martinez arrived an hour later, looking remarkably put together for someone who'd been woken up at 4 a.m. "Well, Molly," she said after examining me, "you're already 6 centimeters dilated. This baby definitely isn't waiting until the 15th. "How long?" David asked, holding my hand as another contraction peaked. "Hard to say with first babies, but I'd guess you'll be meeting your little ones sometime this afternoon." Afternoon. While my family was watching Chloe walk across the stage at Harvard, I'd be pushing their grandchild into the world. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "David," I said during a brief break between contractions, "you should call them. Let them know what's happening." He looked uncertain. "Are you sure? You said—" "I know what I said, but they should know their grandchild is being born today. It's not fair to keep that from them, even if they can't be here." David stepped into the hallway to make the calls while I focused on breathing through the intensifying contractions. By the time he came back 15 minutes later, his face told me everything I needed to know. "I couldn't reach your parents," he said carefully. "Their phones are going straight to voicemail. I think they might have them turned off for the flight." Of course, they'd probably turn them off before boarding their early morning flight to Boston. "What about Jake?" "He got him. He's—" David paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's torn up about this. He wanted to get in the car immediately and drive back, but I told him there wasn't time. He'd miss the whole thing either way."
And Chloe? Jake said he'd tell her. She was already getting ready for pre-graduation photos with their sorority sisters. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me had secretly hoped that when they heard the baby was coming, they'd drop everything and race back to Connecticut. But I knew that wasn't realistic. They'd already spent money on flights and hotels, and Chloe's graduation was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Still, it hurt. The next few hours were a blur of increasing pain, breathing exercises, and the steady presence of David and the nursing staff. Sandra stayed with us through her entire shift, even though I wasn't technically her assigned patient. "My daughter's about your age," she explained when I thanked her for going above and beyond. "I'd want someone to take extra care of her if she was going through this without her mama nearby." Around noon, as my contractions were peaking and I was approaching the pushing stage, my phone buzzed with a text message. David checked it for me since I was a little busy trying not to scream. "It's from your mom," he said gently. "What does it say?" He hesitated. "Just maybe we should wait until after—" "David, tell me what it says." He cleared his throat. "Just heard from Jake. Can't believe baby is coming today. So sorry we can't be there. Graduation ceremony starts in an hour. We'll call as soon as it's over. Give our grandbaby a kiss from Grandma and Grandpa."
I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the mix of emotions flooding through me. They knew their grandchild was being born and they were still staying for the graduation. Of course they were. I'd known they would. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two completely different things. There's more, David said quietly. From who? Jake. He says he loves you and he's sorry he can't be there. He made Sarah promise to live stream the graduation ceremony on her phone so he can watch and think of you at the same time. That almost made me laugh through the pain. My brother, trying to be in two places at once, just like he'd tried to keep everyone happy our whole lives. Anything from Chloe? I asked, though I already knew the answer. David shook his head. Dr. Martinez came back in to check my progress. All right, Molly, you're at 10 centimeters. It's time to start pushing. What followed was the hardest work I'd ever done in my life. 2 hours of pushing, sweating, crying, and reaching deep inside myself for strength I didn't know I had. David never left my side, coaching me through each contraction, cooling my forehead with washcloths, and telling me how proud he was of me. Sandra had ended her shift hours ago but stayed anyway, holding my other hand and offering the kind of steady maternal comfort I desperately needed. There was also a resident named Dr. Kim, barely older than me, who kept checking the baby's heart rate and reassuring me that everything was progressing normally. At 2:47 p.m., while my family was probably taking post-graduation photos in Harvard Yard, my daughter entered the world. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a head full of dark hair and lungs that worked beautifully. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else faded away. The hurt, the loneliness, the complicated family dynamics, none of it mattered. There was just me, David, and this incredible little person we'd created. She's beautiful, Molly. She's absolutely perfect, David whispered, tears streaming down his face. I looked down at my daughter, our daughter, and felt a love so fierce and immediate it took my breath away. This was what mattered. This moment, this family we'd created, this new chapter we were beginning. What should we call her? David asked. We'd narrowed it down to 3 names, but hadn't made a final decision. I studied her tiny face, her perfect little fingers wrapped around mine. Emma, I said without hesitation. Her name is Emma. It wasn't one of the names we'd been considering. It just came to me looking at her and felt absolutely right. Emma Richardson Chin, named in that moment of pure love and joy. Sandra helped me with the first feeding while David called everyone we could think of to share the news. His parents, who immediately started crying happy tears and promised to drive down from Vermont the next morning. Our friends from work, my college roommate who screamed so loudly David had to hold the phone away from his ear. Then he tried my family again. This time, Mom answered on the second ring. David, how is she? How's Molly? We've been worried sick, but the ceremony ran long, and then there were photos, and... She's perfect, Mrs. Richardson. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Mother and baby are both healthy. Oh, thank God, Mom said, and I could hear the relief in her voice, even from across the room. Can I talk to her? David brought the phone over, and for the first time in hours, I heard my mother's voice. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you, she said, and she was crying. I wish we could have been there. I feel terrible that you went through this without us. It's okay, Mom, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Looking down at Emma, I realized that while I'd wanted them there, I'd also proven something to myself. I was stronger than I'd thought. I could handle hard things even when I had to handle them alone. We're going to drive back tonight. We'll be there first thing tomorrow morning. I can't wait to meet my granddaughter. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, we do. This is important, Molly. You're important. The baby is important. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. After we hung up, David and I spent the rest of the evening in our quiet hospital room, taking turns holding Emma and marveling at the fact that we'd created this perfect little person. The nurses had brought us celebratory apple juice and graham crackers, which felt like a feast after the day we'd had. Around 8 p.m., there was a soft knock on our door. Sandra peeked in, now dressed in street clothes. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to check on you before I went home. How is our little early bird doing?" "She's perfect," I said, adjusting Emma in my arms. "Sandra, I can't thank you enough for everything you did today. You made such a difference." She smiled and walked over to look at Emma. "She's beautiful, honey. You did such a good job." "I keep thinking about what you said earlier about wanting someone to take care of your daughter if she was in my situation. You have no idea how much that meant to me." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "You know what? My daughter lives in California, and when she had her first baby 2 years ago, I couldn't get there in time either. A nurse named Janet stayed late to help her through it, and I never got to thank her properly. Today felt like paying that forward." After Sandra left, David and I sat in comfortable silence watching Emma sleep. The sun was setting outside our window, casting long shadows across the room. In a few hours, it would be June 13th, and this whole surreal day would be over. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the evening. Friends and coworkers sending congratulations, David's family planning their visit, even a few colleagues from my freelance clients. But nothing from Chloe. Jake called around 10 p.m., right as David and I were settling in for the night. "Molly, I am so sorry I wasn't there." And he could hear the guilt and sadness in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but good," I said honestly. "Really good, actually. She's incredible, Jake." "I can't wait to meet my niece. What's her name?" "Emma. Emma Richardson Chen." "Emma," he repeated, and I could hear him smiling. "I love it. It's perfect." We talked for a few more minutes about the birth, about Emma's stats, about when he and Sarah might be able to visit. Then, just before we hung up, he said something that surprised me. "Molly, Chloe feels really bad about missing this. She's been quiet all day, even during the celebratory dinner. I think today made her realize some things about what's really important." "She doesn't need to feel bad. This was her special day. She worked hard for it." "Yeah, but family should come first," Jake said quietly. "I think we all learned something today." As I settled Emma in her bassinet next to my bed and David arranged himself on the fold-out chair that would be his bed for the night, I reflected on the strangest day of my life. I'd given birth to my daughter on my sister's graduation day, surrounded by near strangers who became angels, supported by a husband who never left my side. It wasn't the birth story I'd imagined, but looking at Emma's sleeping face in the soft glow of the hospital room's nightlight, I realized it was exactly the birth story we were meant to have. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen when we're completely unprepared for them, when we have to dig deep and find strength we didn't know we possessed. Tomorrow would bring my family, explanations, and probably some difficult conversations. But tonight, it was just the three of us, David, Emma, and me, starting our new life together. And that felt like more than enough. The next morning brought a flurry of visitors, flowers, and the kind of chaos that follows any major life event. David's parents, Carol and Robert Chen, arrived at 7 a.m. with enough food to feed the entire maternity ward and tears in their eyes as they met their first grandchild. "She's absolutely beautiful," Carol whispered, cradling Emma with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised 3 children. "Look at those little fingers and her hair. David, you have your hair." Robert, normally a man of few words, stood beside his wife with his hand on her shoulder, his eyes soft as he watched his son become a father. "You did good, kids," he said simply, which from him was equivalent to a 20-minute speech. Having them there filled a space I hadn't realized was empty. Carol immediately took charge of practical things, coordinating with the nurses about feeding schedules, helping me navigate the hospital's lactation consultant, and making sure David ate something more substantial than vending machine crackers. "Where's Molly's family?" Carol asked David quietly while I was nursing Emma. She thought I couldn't hear, but hospital rooms have thin walls and new mothers develop superhuman hearing. They're driving back from Boston, David explained. They should be here this afternoon. Carol's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She was too polite to say what she was thinking, but I could read it on her face. What kind of family misses the birth of their first grandchild for a graduation ceremony? Around 10 a.m., Dr. Martinez came by from my post-delivery checkup. Everything looked good. My blood pressure was back to normal, Emma was nursing well, and we'd both be able to go home the next day. "How are you feeling emotionally?" she asked, settling into the chair beside my bed. Birth is a huge physical and emotional experience, and the circumstances were a bit unusual. I considered the question. How was I feeling? Physically exhausted, certainly. Emotionally, it was complicated. "I'm proud," I said finally, really proud of myself. I didn't know I could handle something that intense. "You should be proud," Dr. Martinez agreed. "You handled everything beautifully. But it's also normal to feel sad or angry about not having the support you wanted during labor. Those feelings are valid too." She was giving me permission to feel hurt, and I appreciated that. I am sad about it, but I'm also, clearer about some things. Such as? I looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms. I used to spend so much energy trying to make everyone else happy, trying to fit into what they needed me to be. But yesterday, I couldn't do that. I had to focus completely on what Emma and I needed. And we were okay. More than okay. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's a valuable realization. Motherhood has a way of helping us understand our own strength. After she left, I found myself thinking about her words. Motherhood as a teacher of strength. It made sense. For 9 months, I'd been growing this little person inside me, and yesterday I brought her safely into the world. That wasn't something I did for anyone else's approval or to meet anyone else's expectations. It was purely, simply, necessarily mine. My phone had been buzzing all morning with text messages from friends, coworkers, and extended family who'd heard the news. But the silence from Chloe was becoming impossible to ignore. Around noon, David's sister, Lisa, arrived from New York with her 2 kids, David's 5-year-old nephew, Marcus, and 3-year-old niece, Sophia. They burst into the room with the kind of excited energy that only small children can bring. "Where's the baby?" Marcus demanded immediately. "Dad said there's a new baby and I'm a cousin now." "Use your indoor voice," Lisa reminded him. But she was grinning. "And yes, you're officially a big cousin. This is your new cousin, Emma." Sophia was more cautious, hanging back near the door until I invited her to come closer. "She's very little," she observed solemnly. "Is she fragile?" "A little bit," I said, "but she's also stronger than she looks, just like you." Watching David interact with his niece and nephew, seeing how naturally he moved into his role as an uncle and now father, made my heart swell. This was what family looked like. People showing up, making noise, bringing joy and chaos and love in equal measure. Around 1 p.m., my parents finally arrived. I heard Mom's voice in the hallway before I saw her, talking rapidly to a nurse about visiting hours and parking validation. Then she appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, her hair a bit muscled from the long drive, holding an enormous bouquet of pink flowers. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and her voice broke on the words. She crossed the room quickly and carefully, hugged me, mindful of Emma in my arms. "I'm so sorry we weren't here. I'm so sorry." Dad followed behind her, looking uncomfortable in the way he always did in hospitals. He kissed my forehead and peered down at Emma with wonder. "She's beautiful, Molly. Absolutely perfect." "Mom, Dad, this is Emma," I said, adjusting the blanket so they could see her better. "Emma," Mom repeated, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. "Hello, beautiful girl. I'm your grandma." For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Mom fussed over Emma's outfit and asked detailed questions about the delivery. Dad made awkward jokes about how Emma already looked like she was going to be smarter than him. They seemed genuinely sorry they'd missed the birth, genuinely excited to meet their granddaughter. But then Jake and Sarah arrived, and the dynamics shifted. Jake looked exhausted. He'd clearly driven straight through from Boston without stopping. He hugged me fiercely and spent a long time just staring at Emma, his medical training kicking in as he observed her breathing, her color, her reflexes. "She's perfect, Moll," he said, using my childhood nickname again. "Absolutely perfect. How are you feeling? Any complications? Pain level manageable?" Sarah hung back initially, not quite sure of her place in this family moment. Jake and I had always been close, but Sarah was still relatively new to our family dynamics. She was sweet, though, a pediatric nurse herself, which made her the perfect partner for my doctor brother. "Where's Chloe?" I asked when it became clear she wasn't coming through the door behind them. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "She stayed in Boston for another day," Mom said carefully. "Some of her classmates organized a celebration brunch this morning, and then she has dinner plans with her study group tonight." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Marcus and Sophia, who had been chattering constantly, seemed to sense the tension and quieted. "She wanted to come," Jake said quickly. There were commitments." "Commitments," I repeated, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. "Molly," Dad said in his diplomatic tone, "you have to understand how important this networking is for Chloe's career. These Harvard connections could open doors to her that—" "Stop," I said quietly, but firmly enough that everyone in the room heard me. Emma stirred in my arms, and I focused on her, using her presence to anchor myself. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see how I would react. "I understand that Chloe's career is important. I understand that Harvard connections matter. I understand that graduation celebrations are special. What I don't understand is why my daughter's birth doesn't matter enough for her aunt to drive 3 hours to meet her." "That's not fair," Mom said, her voice getting defensive. "Chloe worked incredibly hard for this degree. She deserves to celebrate it properly." "And I worked incredibly hard to bring your granddaughter into this world. But somehow that's less important than a brunch with classmates she'll probably never see again?" The room was completely silent now, except for the soft sounds of Emma breathing. David moved closer to me, a silent show of support. "Molly," Dad said, trying again, "you're being unreasonable. This isn't about choosing between—" "Yes, it is. It's exactly about choosing. And Chloe chose networking over family. You all chose her graduation over my daughter's birth. That's fine. You're allowed to make those choices. But don't pretend they don't mean anything." Carol, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, stood up from where she'd been sitting with Marcus and Sophia. "Robert," she said to her husband, "why don't we take the kids to get some ice cream from the cafeteria?" It was clearly a diplomatic exit, giving my family space to have this conversation without an audience. Lisa gathered her children quickly, and within minutes, it was just David and me facing my parents and Jake and Sarah. "Molly," Mom said, her voice softer now, "I think you're letting your hormones make you more emotional than you need to be about this." That was exactly the wrong thing to say. "My hormones?" I asked, and now I was really angry. "Mom, I gave birth to your granddaughter yesterday, alone, without my family, while you were taking pictures and celebrating someone else's achievement. This isn't about hormones. This is about priorities." "We're here now," Dad pointed out. 24 hours later, after missing the most important moment of my life. Jake stepped forward. "Molly, I wanted to be here. I would have driven back if there had been time."
"I know," I said, and my voice gentled when I looked at him. "You're not who I'm angry with, Jake. You tried to be in 2 places at once, and I appreciate that. But the rest of you?" I looked at my parents. "You made a choice. You chose Chloe's celebration over Emma's birth. That's your right, but it's also my right to be hurt by it." "So what are you saying?" Mom asked. "That we're bad grandparents? Bad parents?" I considered the question seriously.
I'm saying that yesterday taught me something important about who I can count on and who I can't, and I need to make decisions based on that knowledge. What kind of decisions? Dad asked, and there was something wary in his voice. I looked down at Emma, then at David, then back at my parents. I'm going to focus on the people who show up, I said simply. The people who prioritize what's important to me and Emma. The people who don't make me feel like I'm being unreasonable for wanting them in my life. Molly, Mom said, and now she was crying. Please don't punish us for one mistake. We love you. We love Emma. We want to be part of her life. Then show me, I said. Don't tell me I'm being hormonal when I'm hurt. Don't explain to me why other things are more important than my daughter. Don't make me feel guilty for having expectations of my family. Sarah, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. If I may, she said quietly, as someone who's not technically family yet, I think what Molly is saying makes sense. When someone you love is going through something major, you show up. Period. Everything else can wait. Jake looked at her with such gratitude and love that it made my heart ache. That's what I wanted. A partner who understood what mattered, who would stand up for our family even when it was uncomfortable. Sarah's right, I said. It's really that simple. People show up for what matters to them. Yesterday, I found out what matters to each of you. The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. Mom cried and apologized repeatedly. Dad tried to explain and justify until finally Jake told him to stop. We talked about expectations, about communication, about what kind of relationship I wanted Emma to have with her extended family. By the time visiting hours ended, we'd reached an understanding of sorts. My parents would need to earn their place in Emma's life through actions, not words. They would need to show me that we mattered to them, not just tell me. Sarah and Jake promised to visit regularly, and I knew they would. Jake had always been the one person in my family I could count on completely. As for Chloe, well, that relationship would have to be rebuilt from the ground up, if she was even interested in rebuilding it. That evening, after everyone had gone home and it was just David, Emma, and me again, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. How are you feeling about all of that? David asked as we settled in for our second night in the hospital. Sad, I said honestly, but also relieved, I think, like I finally said things that needed to be said. Your parents looked shaken. Good. Maybe that means they'll actually think about what I said. David was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, for Emma, for us. That couldn't have been easy. I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Being her mom is going to require me to be strong in ways I never had to be before. I might as well start now. Outside our window, the sun was setting on our second day as a family of 3. Tomorrow, we'd go home and start our real life together. We'd figure out feeding schedules and sleep deprivation and all the million little details that come with a new baby. But we'd also figure out what our new normal looked like with my family, what boundaries needed to be set, what relationships needed to be rebuilt, and what standards I was going to hold for the people who wanted to be part of Emma's life. Yesterday had taught me that I was stronger than I thought I was. Today had taught me that strength sometimes means setting limits, even with the people you love most. Tomorrow would teach me what came next. But whatever it was, I was ready for it.
Coming home from the hospital should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. David had spent the morning baby-proofing our apartment and setting up the nursery we'd been slowly preparing for months. The gentle sunrise paint we'd finally chosen looked perfect in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Emma's crib, assembled by David at 2 a.m. 3 weeks earlier in a burst of nesting energy, stood ready with fresh sheets and the mobile his mother had made by hand. But as we pulled into our apartment complex, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach that had nothing to do with new parent nerves. "You okay?" David asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I was sitting in the back seat next to Emma's car seat, unable to bear the thought of being separated from her, even by the length of our small car. "Just thinking about everything," I said, watching Emma sleep peacefully despite the car's movement. She was so tiny, so vulnerable. The weight of being responsible for this perfect little person felt overwhelming in the best possible way. Our apartment felt different when we walked through the door. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls, but everything was transformed by Emma's presence. This wasn't just our home anymore. It was her home too. The place where she'd take her first steps, say her first words, grow from baby to toddler to little girl. David had clearly been busy during our hospital stay. The kitchen counter was covered with casseroles from neighbors, cards from friends, and a massive fruit basket from my freelance client who'd somehow heard the news. Fresh flowers filled every available vase, making our small living room look like a garden. "Mrs. Patterson from 3B brought the lasagna," David explained, following my gaze. "And the Johnsons from downstairs made that soup. Everyone's been asking about you both." It was sweet, this outpouring of care from people who were essentially strangers. Our neighbors, David's coworkers, even the barista from the coffee shop where I worked most mornings, all of them had found ways to celebrate Emma's arrival. Their enthusiasm stood in stark contrast to my sister's continued silence. The first few days at home passed in a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the steep learning curve of first-time parenthood. Emma was a good baby. She slept in reasonable stretches, nursed without major difficulties, and seemed content most of the time. But I was struggling more than I'd expected. It wasn't postpartum depression, exactly. Dr. Martinez had given me information about warning signs to watch for, and I didn't fit the profile. I was bonding with Emma beautifully, I wasn't having scary thoughts, and I could still find joy in small moments. But I felt disconnected from my old life in a way I hadn't anticipated. Part of it was the natural adjustment to motherhood. My days now revolved entirely around Emma's needs, and the graphic design work I'd been doing from home felt trivial by comparison. Who cared about logo redesigns and marketing brochures when there was this tiny person depending on me for everything? But part of it was the growing distance I felt from my family. Mom called every day, sometimes twice. She'd ask detailed questions about Emma's feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, whether she was reaching her developmental milestones. She'd offer advice about everything from diaper rash remedies to sleep training techniques. On the surface, she was being the involved grandmother I'd always hoped for. But something felt forced about it. Performative, like she was trying to prove how much she cared through the sheer volume of her attention rather than the quality of it. "Maybe you should bring Emma over this weekend," she suggested during one of our daily calls. "I could cook dinner and we could take some proper family photos. I never did get good pictures of the 4 generations together." 4 generations. She was talking about herself, Dad, me, and Emma. Notably absent from this picture was any mention of Chloe, who had been back from Boston for over a week but still hadn't met her niece. "I don't think we're ready for big family gatherings yet," I said diplomatically. "Emma's still so little and we're still figuring out our routine." "Of course, sweetheart. Whenever you're ready. We just want to be involved, you know? We want to make up for..." She never finished that sentence, never said the words "missing your birth" or "choosing the graduation over you," as if not saying it out loud could make it disappear. Dad was trying to, in his own way. He'd started stopping by after work, usually bearing some practical gift, a package of diapers, a car seat mirror, a book about child development. He was more comfortable with the tangible aspects of grandparenthood than the emotional ones. "How are the finances looking?" he asked during one visit, settling awkwardly on our couch while I nursed Emma. "Babies are expensive, if you need help with anything." "We're okay, Dad," I assured him, though the truth was more complicated. David's paternity leave was unpaid, and my freelance income had dropped to almost nothing. We were managing, but barely.
Well, the offer stands. Your mother and I want to help however we can. It was a generous offer, and I appreciated it, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that it was easier for him to offer money than to examine why he'd chosen to miss the most important day of my life.
Jake and Sarah, on the other hand, had become my lifeline. They visited twice that first week, bringing takeout and staying long enough to hold Emma while David and I took actual showers. Sarah, with her pediatric nursing background, was a wealth of practical information delivered without judgment. "You're doing great," she told me one evening as I struggled with a particularly difficult feeding session. "Every new mom feels overwhelmed sometimes. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong." Jake had taken hundreds of photos of Emma to send to our extended family, and he'd appointed himself as her official medical consultant. "Her color is perfect," he'd report after each visit. "Reflexes are strong. Eyes are tracking properly. She's thriving, Moll." But even Jake was walking on eggshells around the subject of Chloe. "She's been asking about Emma," he mentioned during one visit when Sarah was in the kitchen heating up the soup they'd brought. "Asking what?" I said, not looking up from changing Emma's diaper. "Just how she's doing, if she's healthy, when might be a good time to visit." I finished fastening Emma's clean diaper and picked her up, holding up close. "She can visit any time she wants. She knows where we live." "Molly, she feels bad about not coming to the hospital. She knows she messed up." "Then she can tell me that herself." Jake sighed. "You know how she is with emotions. She's not good at admitting when she's wrong." "That's not my problem anymore, Jake." It wasn't that I was trying to be cruel. I genuinely wanted a relationship with my sister, but I was learning, in these early weeks of motherhood, that I didn't have the energy to manage other people's emotions for them. If Chloe wanted to meet her niece, she needed to take the initiative. I wasn't going to chase her. 2 weeks after Emma's birth, I got a text message that changed everything. I was sitting in the nursery at 3 a.m., feeding Emma in the quiet darkness, when my phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made it clear who had sent it. "Heard you had the baby. Congrats. Would love to meet her sometime. C." Chloe had gotten a new phone number and texted me like we were casual acquaintances rather than sisters. No apology for missing the birth, no acknowledgement of the hurt her absence had caused, just a casual suggestion that she might, at some point, like to meet Emma. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a mix of anger and sadness that surprised me with its intensity. This was my sister, the person I'd shared a room with until I was 16, the person who taught me to braid my hair and helped me pick out my prom dress. We'd grown apart over the years, but I'd always assumed that underneath our differences, we still loved each other. But this message felt like a dismissal. Like Emma's birth was just another life event to be acknowledged and moved past, rather than the earth-shaking moment that it had been for me. I didn't respond to the text that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I found myself pulling closer to the people who had shown up without being asked. Carol and Robert came over every few days, usually bringing meals and staying just long enough to help without overstaying their welcome. Carol had a gift for knowing exactly what I needed. Sometimes it was practical help with laundry or dishes. Sometimes it was just someone to hold Emma while I took a nap. "You remind me of myself when David was born," she told me one afternoon as we folded tiny onesies. "So determined to do everything perfectly, so worried about making mistakes." "Were you scared?" I asked. "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh, "but also completely in love. That combination of fear and love, that is what makes good mothers." My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had become an unexpected ally as well. She was in her 70s, a retired teacher who'd raised 4 children of her own. She had a way of showing up at exactly the right moments, when I was overwhelmed by a fussy evening, when I needed someone to hold Emma while I ran to the grocery store, when I just needed an adult conversation that didn't revolve around feeding schedules and sleep training. "The thing about family," she said one day while Emma napped in her arms, "is that it's not just about who you're related to. It's about who shows up when you need them."
Her words stayed with me as I navigated those early weeks of motherhood. Family wasn't just biology, it was choice, commitment, presence. The people who called themselves my family had let me down when I needed them the most, but the people who had chosen to be family were there every day. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, Mom called with news that forced everything to a head. "We're planning a family barbecue for the 4th of July, she announced. "Nothing big, just immediate family. I thought it would be nice for everyone to meet Emma properly." "Everyone?" I asked. "Well, you and David and Emma, of course. Jake and Sarah, and Chloe will be there. She's driving up from the city for the weekend."
The city. Chloe had apparently moved to New York after graduation, landing some high-powered consulting job that she'd mentioned to our parents, but not to me. I'd heard about it secondhand through Jake. "I don't think we'll be able to make it," I said. "Molly, please. It's been 3 weeks since Emma was born, and Chloe still hasn't met her. This is getting ridiculous." "What's ridiculous," I said, feeling my temper flare, "is that it's been 3 weeks and Chloe still hasn't made any effort to meet her niece. She sent me one text, Mom. One text, like we're distant cousins instead of sisters. She's been busy with her new job, and you know how hard it is for her to what? Act like she cares about anyone besides herself?" Mom was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's not fair, Molly. Chloe loves you." "Does she? Because I have no evidence of that. She missed the most important day of my life for a networking brunch. She's been back for 3 weeks and hasn't visited. She got my number from someone else instead of asking me directly. When exactly am I supposed to see this love you're talking about?" "She's your sister. Biology doesn't make someone family, Mom. Actions do. And Chloe's actions have made it pretty clear where I rank in her priorities." The conversation ended with Mom in tears and me feeling like the villain, which seemed to be my role in every family interaction these days. But I was tired of being the one who accommodated everyone else's feelings while my own went unacknowledged. That evening, David and I had our first real fight since Emma was born. "Maybe you should consider going to the barbecue," he suggested gently, while we were getting ready for bed. "It might be good for Emma to have a relationship with your whole family. Even the parts of my family that don't care about her? Maybe Chloe does care, but she doesn't know how to show it. Some people are just bad at emotions." "Don't," I said, and my voice was sharper than I'd intended. "Don't make excuses for her. She's 26 years old, David. She has a Harvard MBA. She's perfectly capable of picking up a phone or driving 3 hours to meet her niece if she actually wanted to." "I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that maybe cutting her off completely isn't the answer." "I'm not cutting her off. I'm just not chasing her anymore. There's a difference." David sighed. "Molly, I love how protective you are of Emma, but she's going to grow up in this family, complicated as it is. Maybe it's worth trying to repair some of these relationships instead of writing them off." His words stung, because part of me knew he was right. Emma would grow up with these people as her extended family, whether I liked it or not. But another part of me, the part that had given birth alone while her family celebrated someone else, wasn't ready to forgive just for the sake of peace. "I'll think about it," I told him, which was as much as I could promise. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Emma's soft breathing from her bassinet beside me, I realized that my commitment wasn't to maintaining family harmony. My commitment was to protecting this little person, to surrounding her with people who would show up for her the way they should have shown up for me. And if that meant some relationships had to change or end, then that was a price I was willing to pay. The question was, would my family be willing to do the work necessary to earn their place in Emma's life? Or would they continue to expect forgiveness without accountability, love without effort, family connection without actually showing up? The 4th of July barbecue would be the test that determined everything. The 4th of July barbecue at my parents' house was supposed to be a fresh start. Mom had planned everything meticulously. Red, white, and blue decorations, Emma's first patriotic outfit that she'd bought specially for the occasion, and enough food to feed a small army. She'd even set up a special photo area in the backyard with a banner that read, "Welcome to the family, Emma." But as David and I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, I felt like I was walking into a minefield. "You sure you're ready for this?" David asked, glancing at me as he turned off the engine. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her car seat, blissfully unaware of the family drama swirling around her. "No," I said honestly, "but we're here, so let's get it over with." The house looked exactly the same as it had during countless family gatherings over the years. Mom's flower garden in full summer bloom, Dad's perfectly manicured lawn, the American flag hanging from the front porch. But everything felt different now. I was no longer just Molly, the youngest Richardson kid. I was Emma's mother, and that role took precedence over everything else. Mom must have been watching for us because she appeared at the front door before we'd even gotten Emma's car seat out of the car. She was wearing a new red sundress and had clearly spent extra time on her hair and makeup. "Oh, she's gotten so big," Mom exclaimed, peering into the car seat as we carried Emma up the front steps. "Look at those cheeks! David, you look just like you did as a baby." Dad appeared behind her, and for a moment it felt like old times. They were both genuinely excited to see Emma, and their joy seemed authentic rather than performative. Maybe this would be okay after all. Jake and Sarah were already there, sitting on the back patio with drinks and looking relaxed. Jake jumped up when he saw us, immediately reaching for Emma's car seat. "There's my favorite niece," he said, carefully lifting her out and cradling her against his chest. "Uncle Jake missed you, little one." "She's your only niece," Sarah pointed out with a laugh, but her eyes were soft as she watched Jake with Emma. "Details," Jake grinned. For about an hour, everything went smoothly. We sat in the backyard, Emma charmed everyone by staying awake and alert, and the conversation stayed safely in neutral territory. The weather, David's work, Jake's residency updates. Mom had prepared all of Emma's favorite foods that I'd mentioned liking while pregnant, and Dad actually seemed relaxed for once. But I kept glancing at the driveway, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped at 3:30 p.m. when a black BMW pulled into the driveway and Chloe stepped out. I hadn't seen my sister since Christmas, 6 months before Emma was born. She looked different, more polished, more professional. Her hair was styled in an expensive-looking cut, she was wearing designer clothes I didn't recognize, and she moved with a confidence that seemed new. Success suited her, I had to admit. But when she walked through the back gate and saw our family gathering, something shifted in her expression. For just a moment, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. Then the polished mask slipped back into place. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing Mom and Dad on the cheek before turning to Jake and Sarah. "Traffic from the city was insane." She nodded at David and me politely, like we were casual acquaintances. "David, Molly, good to see you." Her eyes found Emma, who was sleeping in Jake's arms, and she paused. For a second, her professional composure cracked, and I saw something raw in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or wonder. Emma was real to her now, not just an abstract concept. "This is Emma," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "She's beautiful," Chloe said quietly. Then, louder, with her business voice back in place, "Congratulations. I'm sure you're both very happy." The conversation that followed was excruciating. Chloe talked about her new job at a consulting firm, her Manhattan apartment, the important client she was working with. She name-dropped restaurants and networking events and business trips like she was giving a presentation to potential investors. Meanwhile, Emma woke up and started to fuss, and I excused myself to nurse her in Mom's living room. The quiet sanctuary of that familiar space, the same couch where I'd done homework as a teenager, the same family photos on the mantle, gave me a moment to collect myself. But Chloe followed me inside. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the armchair across from where I was settled with Emma. I nodded, not trusting my voice. For a few minutes, we sat in silence while Emma nursed. Chloe watched us with an expression I couldn't read, her usual confidence seeming to evaporate in the presence of this tiny nursing baby. "She really is beautiful," Chloe said finally. "She looks like you did as a baby." "Thank you." More silence. Then, "I heard the birth was complicated." I looked up sharply. "Complicated how?" "Just that it happened early and we were all in Boston and—" She trailed off, seeming to realize she was walking into dangerous territory. "And you all stayed for your graduation celebration instead of coming to meet your niece," I finished. Chloe's face flushed. "Molly, it wasn't that simple. There were commitments and flights that couldn't be changed, and—" "There was a choice," I interrupted. "And you chose networking brunches over family. That's fine, but don't pretend it was complicated. That's not fair." "What's not fair is having your sister give birth alone while you're taking Instagram photos with your Harvard classmates." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final. Emma had finished nursing and was looking up at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. I adjusted her on my shoulder and patted her back gently, using the familiar rhythm to calm myself. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Didn't know what?" "That it would matter to you so much, that me being there was important." I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "Chloe, I'm your sister. Of course it mattered." "But you had David and the doctors and—" "I wanted my family," I said, and my voice broke on the words. "I wanted my sister. I wanted to share the most important moment of my life with the people I love most, and instead, I was alone." Chloe looked down at her hands, her perfectly manicured nails picking at the fabric of her expensive dress. I thought there would be other times, that this was just one day and there would be lots of other important moments with the baby." "There will be, but there was only one day she was born, only one first moment, and you chose not to be there. I'm here now. 3 weeks later, because Mom organized this barbecue and you felt obligated to show up." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When was the last time you called me before this? When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you acted like you cared about my life at all?" Chloe's composure finally cracked completely. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice rising. "I don't know how to be the kind of sister you want me to be. I don't know how to care about babies and family drama and all the things that seem to come naturally to everyone else." "It's not about coming naturally. It's about trying. It's about showing up even when it's inconvenient. It's about caring enough to make an effort." "I do care," she insisted. "Then prove it." Before Chloe could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway. "Is everything okay in here? We could hear voices." "We're fine," I said, standing up with Emma. But as I looked between my mother and my sister, I realized that nothing was fine. Nothing had been fine for a long time, and this forced family gathering wasn't going to magically fix years of distance and different priorities. The rest of the barbecue was a disaster waiting to happen. We all went through the motions, eating hamburgers and potato salad, taking the obligatory family photos, making small talk about safe topics. But the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The breaking point came during dessert, when Mom brought out a cake she'd had specially made. It was decorated with pink frosting and "Welcome Baby Emma" written in delicate script across the top. "I thought we could do a little ceremony," Mom announced, setting the cake on the patio table. "Like a mini baby shower. I know we missed the actual birth, but we can still celebrate Emma properly." She had clearly put thought and effort into this gesture, but it felt hollow to me, like she was trying to create a moment that would erase the moment they'd all missed. "That's sweet, Mom," I said carefully, "but we already had a baby shower." "I know, but that was before Emma was born. This would be different, more personal." Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even Dad looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Mom," Chloe said suddenly, "maybe this isn't the right time." "It's the perfect time," Mom insisted, her voice getting that edge it took on when she was determined to make something work despite all evidence that it wouldn't. "We're all here together. Emma is healthy and beautiful, and we want to celebrate that." "You want to celebrate.
I corrected. You want to feel better about missing the actual celebration. The words were out before I could stop them. Mom's face went white, then red. Molly, that's enough, Dad said sharply. Your mother has worked very hard to make this day special. For who? I asked, standing up and holding Emma closer. For Emma? She's 3 weeks old, Dad. She doesn't care about cake or ceremonies. This is for you, all of you, to make yourselves feel better about the choices you made. We're trying to include you, Mom said, and now she was crying. We're trying to be good grandparents. You don't get to skip the hard parts and show up for the celebration. You don't get to miss the birth and then throw a party to make up for it. What do you want from us? Chloe demanded, finally finding her voice again. We can't go back and change what happened. We can't undo the fact that we were in Boston. What do you want us to do? I want you to stop acting like this is my problem to fix. I want you to stop making me feel guilty for being hurt. I want you to acknowledge that you made choices that hurt me and Emma, and those choices had consequences. We've apologized, Dad said. No, you haven't. You've explained. You've justified. You've told me why other things were more important, but you've never actually said, I'm sorry, and meant it. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma, picking up on the tension, started to cry. I bounced her gently, trying to soothe her, while tears rolled down my own cheeks. Maybe we should go, David said quietly, standing beside me. Yes, I agreed. I think we should. As we gathered Emma's things and prepared to leave, my family stood around looking shock-shelled. This wasn't how anyone had imagined the day going. Molly, Mom called as we reached the back gate. Please don't leave like this. We can work this out. I turned back to look at them. My parents, my brother and his fiancée, my sister with her perfect hair and expensive clothes. They looked sad and confused, like they genuinely didn't understand what had gone wrong. When you're ready to have a real conversation about what happened, call me. When you're ready to acknowledge that Emma and I deserved better, call me. When you're ready to do the real work necessary to earn a place in our lives, call me. But until then, we're done pretending everything is fine when it's not. The drive home was quiet, except for Emma's soft breathing from her car seat. David didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances or suggestions, and I was grateful for that. Sometimes there's nothing to say except that something is broken and will take time and effort to fix. When we got home, I put Emma down for a nap and sat in the nursery's rocking chair, staring out the window at the late afternoon sun. I felt empty, drained, like I'd finally said everything that had been building up inside me for weeks. But I also felt something else. Relief. The pretending was over. The polite accommodations, the careful navigation of everyone else's feelings while ignoring my own, all of it was finally finished. Now we'd see who was willing to do the real work of rebuilding our relationships, and who would rather blame me for being unreasonable than examine their own behavior. Either way, Emma and I would be okay. We had David, we had chosen family who showed up when it mattered, and we had each other. Sometimes that's enough to build a life on. Sometimes it has to be.
The silence that followed our dramatic exit from the 4th of July barbecue was deafening. And it lasted for 2 weeks. No phone calls from Mom with her daily check-ins, no awkward visits from Dad bearing practical gifts, no texts from anyone asking how Emma was doing or whether I'd reconsidered my position. It was as if my entire family had collectively decided that if they couldn't have the relationship they wanted on their terms, they wouldn't have one at all. At first, the silence felt like vindication. See, I told myself, this proves they were only interested in a relationship where I did all the accommodating and they didn't have to examine their own behavior. But as the days stretched on, the silence began to feel different, heavier, more permanent. Maybe you should call them, David suggested one evening as we sat in the living room, Emma sleeping peacefully in her bouncy seat between us. Maybe they're waiting for you to make the first move. Why should I be the one to call? I asked, not looking up from the freelance project I was working on, a logo design for a local bakery that felt wonderfully uncomplicated compared to family dynamics. I'm not the one who needs to apologize. Maybe it's not about who should call. Maybe it's about who's willing to call. His words stung, because there was truth in them. I'd drawn a line in the sand, established my boundaries, made my position clear. But now what? Was I supposed to maintain this distance forever? Watch Emma grow up without knowing her grandparents, her aunts, the entire extended family that had shaped my own childhood? The uncertainty was eating at me, but my pride wouldn't let me be the first to reach out. I'd been the accommodating one for too long, always smoothing over conflicts and managing everyone else's emotions. If they wanted a relationship with Emma and me, they needed to show they were willing to do the work. During those 2 weeks of silence, I found myself leaning even more heavily on the people who had consistently shown up. Carol and Robert visited twice, bringing homemade soup, and staying just long enough to help with household tasks I couldn't manage while caring for Emma. Mrs. Patterson stopped by regularly with offers to hold the baby while I napped or showered. But it was Sandra, the nurse from the hospital, who provided the breakthrough I desperately needed. She called on a Tuesday evening just to check in. Hospital protocol didn't require follow-up calls 3 weeks post-delivery, but Sandra had developed a habit of checking on her patients who'd had unusual circumstances. "How are you settling in at home?" she asked, after we'd discussed Emma's feeding schedule and sleep patterns. "It's been complicated," I admitted, and then found myself telling her about the family barbecue disaster. She listened without judgment as I explained the confrontation, the ultimatum I'd given, the silence that had followed. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said finally, "in 30 years of nursing, I've seen a lot of families go through crisis moments. Birth has a way of bringing out both the best and worst in people." "What do you mean?" "Well, when a baby's born, everyone's roles shift. You're not just the youngest daughter anymore, you're a mother. Your parents aren't just parents, they're grandparents. Your sister isn't just your sister, she's an aunt. Sometimes people don't know how to navigate those new roles, especially when there's already tension in the relationships." I shifted Emma to my other arm, considering Sandra's words. "So you think I should forgive them? Pretend it never happened?" "I think," Sandra said carefully, "that forgiveness and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. You can forgive someone and still expect them to do better. You can love your family and still maintain boundaries." "But they haven't even tried to apologize. They've just disappeared." "Maybe they don't know how. Maybe they're scared they've lost you for good and don't know how to fix it." After we hung up, Sandra's words stayed with me. Was it possible that my family's silence wasn't defiance, but fear? Had I been so focused on protecting myself and Emma that I'd inadvertently created a situation where reconciliation felt impossible? The answer came 3 days later in the most unexpected way. I was at the grocery store with Emma, navigating the produce section while she dozed in her car seat when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Molly?" I turned to find Mrs. Henderson, my high school English teacher, pushing her own cart and smiling warmly. "Molly, how are you?" "Oh, wonderful, dear, and congratulations!" She peered into Emma's car seat with the practiced eye of someone who'd taught teenagers for 40 years and knew exactly how to appreciate babies. "She's absolutely beautiful. What's her name?" "Emma. Emma Richardson Chen."
Perfect name for a perfect little girl. Mrs. Henderson straightened up, and her expression grew more serious. "I actually ran into your mother at the library yesterday. She mentioned there had been some family difficulties around Emma's birth." My stomach clenched. "She did?" "She seemed quite upset about it. She said she felt like she'd failed you somehow, and she didn't know how to make it right." This was not the conversation I'd expected to have in the produce section of Stop and Shop. "What exactly did she say?" Mrs. Henderson glanced around, making sure we weren't blocking other shoppers. "Well, she was checking out books about grandparenting and child development. I commented on them, and she just broke down. started crying right there by the circulation desk. The image of my composed, always put-together mother crying in public over parenting books hit me like a physical blow. She said she'd never had to navigate being a grandmother before, and she felt like she'd made all the wrong choices. She was particularly upset about missing Emma's birth. She said it was the biggest regret of her life, but she didn't know how to express that without sounding like she was making excuses. I stood there holding a bag of apples, trying to process this information. My mother, who prided herself on having everything under control, was checking out parenting books and crying in libraries. Did she say anything else? Mrs. Henderson hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. Well, she mentioned that your sister had been calling her, trying to figure out how to reach out to you. Apparently, Chloe's been struggling with this situation too, but she doesn't know how to admit she was wrong without losing face. The Chloe I knew had never had trouble admitting she was wrong, mainly because she rarely thought she was wrong about anything. If she was struggling with this, it suggested the situation had affected her more deeply than I'd realized. Mrs. Henderson, I said carefully, did my mother ask you to talk to me if you saw me? She shook her head. Oh, no, dear, I'm not that kind of person. But seeing you here with this beautiful baby, well, I've seen enough family estrangements in my years to know that pride is often the only thing standing between people who love each other. That evening, after David got home from work and we'd settled into our usual routine of dinner and baby care, I told him about the encounter with Mrs. Henderson. So, what are you thinking? He asked as we cleaned up the kitchen together, Emma watching us from her bouncy seat. I'm thinking that maybe Sandra was right. Maybe they don't know how to fix this. But you still think they should be the ones to reach out first? I considered the question while wiping down the counters. I think there's a difference between reaching out and taking responsibility. I'm willing to have a conversation, but I need them to acknowledge what they did wrong before we can move forward. So, what's your next step? Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake's name, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hey, Jake. Molly, thank God you picked up. Are you busy? Can we talk? There was something in his voice, urgency maybe, or desperation, that made me pay attention. What's wrong? I'm sitting in my car outside Mom and Dad's house. I came over to talk to them about this whole situation, and, Molly, I think you need to hear what's been going on. What do you mean?
Jake took a deep breath. Mom hasn't been sleeping. She's been reading every parenting book she can get her hands on, trying to figure out how to be a better grandmother. Dad's been driving by your apartment complex every few days, not stopping, just checking to make sure you're okay from a distance. The image of my father doing surveillance drives past my home was both touching and heartbreaking. And Chloe, Jake continued, she's been calling me almost every day, asking questions about babies and what Emma needs and whether I think you'd be willing to see her if she came to Connecticut. She could just call me herself, I pointed out. She's terrified you'll hang up on her. She thinks she's ruined everything permanently. I looked across the room at Emma, who was starting to fuss in her bouncy seat. David got up to check her diaper, moving with the practiced efficiency we'd both developed over the past month of parenthood. Jake, why are you telling me this? Because I think you're all being stubborn and stupid, and Emma deserves to know her whole family. His voice was gentle but firm. I think Mom and Dad and Chloe all screwed up, but I also think they're genuinely sorry and don't know how to show it. And I think you're scared to make the first move because you're afraid they'll let you down again. He wasn't wrong. Fear was a huge part of what was keeping me from reaching out. Fear that if I extended an olive branch, they'd take it as permission to go back to the old dynamic, where my feelings didn't matter as much as everyone else's comfort. What do you think I should do? I think you should call a family meeting, set the terms, make it clear what you need from each of them, and give them a chance to step up.
If they don't, then at least you'll know you tried. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room with David and Emma, thinking about everything I'd learned that day. My mother crying in the library, my father doing drive-bys to check on us, my sister calling Jake daily for advice about babies. Maybe they were trying, just not in ways I could see or recognize. You know what I realized today? I said to David as he settled back on the couch with Emma. What's that? I've been waiting for them to apologize in exactly the way I want them to, using exactly the words I need to hear. But maybe that's not fair. Maybe people show remorse differently, and I've been so focused on my hurt that I haven't been paying attention to their efforts. David nodded slowly. So what does that mean? I looked at Emma, peaceful now in her father's arms, and thought about the kind of mother I wanted to be. Did I want to be the kind of person who held grudges forever, who let pride prevent healing, who deprived my daughter of relationships that could enrich her life? It means, I said, reaching for my phone, that I'm going to call my mother and invite them all over for dinner this weekend, and I'm going to tell them exactly what I need from each of them if they want to be part of Emma's life. You sure you're ready for that? I wasn't sure about anything, except that staying frozen in the standoff wasn't helping anyone. Emma deserved a chance to know her extended family, and they deserved a chance to prove they could do better. I'm ready to try, and I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been sitting by the phone waiting. Molly? Her voice was tentative, hopeful, scared. Hi, Mom. I think it's time we all had a real conversation.
The family meeting I called for that Saturday afternoon was unlike any gathering we'd ever had. There were no decorations, no special meal preparations, no attempts to make everything picture perfect. Just my living room, some folding chairs David had borrowed from our neighbors, and the weight of everything that needed to be said. I'd spent the week preparing, not just practically, but emotionally. I'd written down the specific things I needed to hear from each family member, the boundaries I needed to establish, and the changes that would have to happen if we were going to rebuild our relationships. Emma was 6 weeks old now, more alert and interactive, and she seemed to sense the importance of the day. She stayed calm and content throughout the afternoon, as if she understood that her future relationships with these people depended on how the next few hours went. Mom and Dad arrived first, 15 minutes early, looking nervous and uncertain. Mom carried a small gift bag, which she set down without mentioning. Dad kept checking his watch and adjusting his glasses, his tells for anxiety that I'd learned to recognize in childhood. Jake and Sarah came next, followed by Chloe, who looked more subdued than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the polished professional persona from the barbecue. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the sister I remembered from our teenage years. "Thank you all for coming," I said once everyone was settled. Emma was in my lap, serving as both comfort and reminder of why we were there. I know this has been a difficult few weeks for everyone. "Molly," Mom started, but I held up a gentle hand. "I need to say some things first, and then I want to hear from each of you, okay?" Everyone nodded, and I took a deep breath. 6 weeks ago, I gave birth to Emma without any of my family present. That wasn't how I'd imagined one of the most important days of my life would go. I felt abandoned, hurt, and alone during a time when I needed support most. I'd looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. But I've realized that hurt people often hurt people, and I may have been so focused on my own pain that I couldn't see yours. I've learned that you've all been struggling with this situation too, in your own ways. Dad shifted in his chair, and I could see his eyes starting to fill with tears. So here's what I need. I need honest acknowledgement of what happened and how it affected me. I need to understand your perspectives without feeling like you're making excuses. And I need commitments about how things will be different going forward. I turned to my parents first. "Mom, Dad,
You chose to attend Chloe's graduation instead of being available when Emma was born. I understand the circumstances were complicated, but I need you to understand how that choice affected me. Mom's composure finally cracked completely. Molly, sweetheart, it was the worst decision I've ever made in my life. Tears were streaming down her face. I've replayed that day 1,000 times, and I hate that I wasn't there for you. I hate that my first grandchild came into this world without me there to welcome her. I thought we were making a practical decision, Dad added, his voice thick with emotion. I thought first babies always came late and we'd be back in plenty of time. I thought Chloe's graduation was a once-in-a-lifetime event that couldn't be missed. But I was wrong. Emma's birth was the once-in-a-lifetime event, and we missed it. Why didn't you come back when you found out I was in labor? I asked. Mom and Dad looked at each other, and I could see years of marriage communication in that glance. We panicked, Mom admitted. We called the airline, but there were no flights until the next day. We looked into driving, but it would have taken 6 hours. And by then she would already be born, and we thought maybe it was better to wait and come back as planned rather than racing back and arriving stressed and exhausted. But mostly, Dad said quietly, we were scared. Scared that we'd already ruined everything by not being there. Scared that showing up in the middle of the night wouldn't fix anything. Scared that you'd be so angry you wouldn't want to see us. Their honesty was painful but necessary. I could see genuine remorse, not just regret about the consequences, but understanding of how their choices had hurt me. What I need from you going forward is for Emma and me to be a priority. Not the only priority, but a real one. I need you to show up for the important moments, and I need you to ask me what those moments are instead of assuming you know. Yes, Mom said immediately. Absolutely, whatever you need.
And I need you to stop trying to manage my emotions or tell me how I should feel about things. When I'm hurt, I need you to listen and acknowledge that, not explain why I shouldn't be hurt. Dad nodded earnestly. We understand. We want to do better, Molly. We want to be the grandparents Emma deserves. I turned to Chloe next, and she looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. Chloe, your absence has been the hardest part of all of this. Not just missing Emma's birth, but the weeks afterward. The dismissive text message, the lack of effort to meet your niece, the feeling that Emma and I don't matter to you at all. Chloe's face crumpled, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm not good at this, Molly. I'm not good at family stuff, at emotions, at knowing what to say or do in situations like this. But that's not an excuse, she continued quickly, seeing my expression. I've spent my whole life focusing on achievements and career goals because those things make sense to me. They have clear metrics for success. But relationships? Family? I never learned how to prioritize those things. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. When Emma was born and I wasn't there, I felt terrible. But I also felt like it was too late to fix it. Like I'd already proven what kind of person I was. So I avoided the situation instead of facing it. Why didn't you just come to the hospital? Or visit afterward? Because I was ashamed, simply. And because I didn't know what to say. Sorry I chose networking over your baby seemed inadequate. And the longer I waited, the worse it got. She looked at Emma, who was looking back at her with those alert, dark eyes. I've been taking parenting classes. What? Online parenting classes and child development courses. I figured if I was going to be an aunt, I should learn how to do it properly. I wanted to understand what Emma would need from me at different stages, what kinds of gifts are appropriate, how to interact with babies safely. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Chloe, who had never shown interest in children, was taking classes to learn how to be a good aunt. I've also been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I'm so bad at prioritizing relationships over achievements. Why I always seem to hurt the people I love most. Jake, who had been quietly listening to everything, spoke up. Molly,
Can I say something? I nodded. I think we all learned something important from this experience. We learned that good intentions aren't enough if they don't translate into the right actions. We learned that assumptions about what matters to other people are dangerous. And we learned that family relationships require actual work, not just proximity and shared DNA. Sarah, who had been mostly silent, added, "From an outside perspective, I can see how much you all love each other. But I can also see how you've all been operating under different assumptions about how to show that love. This conversation is the first time I've heard everyone actually articulate what they need instead of expecting the others to guess." She was right. We'd been a family of mind readers, assuming we knew what others wanted without ever asking directly. So, where do we go from here? What followed was the most honest conversation our family had ever had. We talked about communication styles, about expectations, about how to handle conflicts in the future. We established new traditions, regular family dinners where everyone was expected to be present unless there was a genuine emergency, monthly one-on-one time between Emma and each grandparent, and a family group chat where we could share updates and coordinate schedules.
Mom asked if she could take Emma for an afternoon each week once I was comfortable with that to build their own special relationship. Dad offered to handle college savings planning and financial advice as Emma grew up. Chloe, in a move that surprised everyone, asked if she could be the family photographer, documenting Emma's milestones and creating photo albums for everyone. "I missed her birth," Chloe said, "but I don't want to miss anything else. I want to capture every important moment from now on." Jake and Sarah offered to be the backup support system, the people we could call for babysitting, emergency childcare, or just when we needed adult conversation and a home-cooked meal. By the time everyone left that evening, something fundamental had shifted. We weren't the same family we'd been before Emma's birth, and we weren't trying to go back to that dynamic. We were building something new, based on honesty and clear communication rather than assumptions and unspoken expectations. 3 months later, as I write this story, I can honestly say that Emma has the loving, engaged, extended family I'd always hoped for her. Mom comes over every Tuesday afternoon and has learned to follow Emma's cues rather than imposing her own agenda. Dad has read more parenting books than some actual parents and delights in explaining child development milestones to anyone who will listen. Chloe has become Emma's devoted aunt, showing up for every monthly aunt day with age-appropriate activities and a camera full of photos from the previous visit. She's even started dating someone, a pediatrician she met at one of her parenting classes, who loves children and wants a family. Jake and Sarah got married last month, and Emma was the flower girl. At 6 months old, she slept through most of the ceremony, but she looked adorable in her tiny dress, and the photos Chloe took are absolutely perfect. The experience taught me that sometimes the most important conversations are the hardest ones to have. Sometimes love requires setting boundaries and demanding better from the people we care about. Sometimes family relationships need to break a little before they can heal stronger. Most importantly, it taught me that showing up isn't just about physical presence. It's about emotional availability, genuine effort, and the willingness to prioritize what matters most to the people you love. Emma will grow up knowing that she's surrounded by people who fought for their relationships with her, who worked through difficult emotions and conversations to be present in her life. She'll know that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day, and sometimes it requires courage, humility, and change. And she'll know that on the day she was born, when everything seemed uncertain and painful, she was actually surrounded by more love than I initially realized. It just took some time for all of us to figure out how to show it properly. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones who never face crisis.
They're the ones who learn how to work through crisis together, with honesty, accountability, and love that's strong enough to demand better from each other. That's the kind of family Emma has now. And that's the kind of mother I'm learning to be, one who shows up, speaks up, and never settles for less than what my daughter deserves. Because in the end, that's what love really looks like.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.